Hi, I'm Matt Little. I'm the Director of Counseling and Education at Empowering Awareness.Asia, and I'm a proud sponsor of this podcast.
How's it going?
Hey, I'm doing good, sir. How are you doing?
I can't complain. Can't complain. It's been a busy week. I've had a couple of big customer meetings, and I presented at Texas Linux Festival here in Austin. So it's been crazy.
Wonderful. So, firstly, thank you very much for giving me opportunity again for the second time to
Yeah,
interview you for my podcast.
my pleasure.
So, when I have interviewed last time, you was working in AWS, and now I see you are I see there is change of role. So, I thought to tell about your new role and a bit of past experience and how your technology background helped you to be where you are today, and about
Sure.
the present work that you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, sure,
Can
sure.
you please
So
introduce yourself?
yeah, my name's Thomas Cameron. I am a senior principal specialist solution architect at Red Hat. I specialize in automation with Ansible Automation Platform and Red Hat Enterprise Linux because that's really what my background is. I just passed a year back at Red Hat. Prior to that, I was at AWS. And prior to that, I was at Red Hat. So I was at Red Hat for about 14 years, left, and came back.
So before continuing, uh, can you fix your camera a bit downwards so that there
Hang
is
on a
a lot
second.
of space? Yeah,
Like that?
yeah. Little bit more, like there is still space above your head.
How's that?
A bit, I mean, little bit upwards.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. This is fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So how is this? Like, how do you define yourself before and after?
Um, I mean, I have always, I think, been an open source technologist. I mean, when I first started in the industry, the the biggest player in network operating systems was Novell NetWare. So obviously that was closed source, and so that's where I started. Then from there, I went to Microsoft back in '94, I think it was, and when I was at Microsoft, I actually was exposed to Linux and absolutely fell in love. And I've been an open source guy ever since. I mean, obviously, I work with all sorts of different technologies, but I think that if you had to summarize my career in one sentence, it would be I am an open source guy. So Linux and Samba and all the different technologies that are associated with Linux.
So how is the solutions architect?
So, as a solution architect, what I do is I work with customers and potential customers basically to teach them about the different offerings that Red Hat has, around Red Hat Enterprise Linux or OpenShift, which is a Kubernetes distribution, or in my case, Ansible Automation Platform, which is an enterprise automation platform for doing things like software configuration and deployment and updates and network switch and router configuration. So Ansible does pretty much everything from like cloud computing to data centers to edge networking, all sorts of things like that. So what I do is I will teach customers about, hey, here's how you can perform these various tasks in your enterprise with the goal of trying to get them to adopt the technology.
So, I mean, what size of the businesses of your clients?
I have some customers that are as small as, 3 or 4,000. devices that they're managing, whether that's servers or routers or switches. To I think the largest customer that I work with has about 140,000 devices that they manage, with an end goal of getting up over 200,000. So it's everything from really small to really large.
So how different it is working with small and big customers?
Well, you know, the a lot of the concerns and the goals are actually the same, whether it's a small customer or a large customer, right? In every case, um, all of my customers say, I don't have enough manpower, I don't have enough people, and I'm being asked to do more and more and more. And so the concerns are always the same. I think when you talk about smaller environments, it's a lot more like I'm going to have a very customized automation process for, let's say, Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers or Windows servers or whatever. So they will spend a lot of time, figuring out how to automate processes in their environments. Where with the really large customers, it's usually more of like, I need to make sure that my configurations are identical across this 10,000 server environment. So there's a whole lot more emphasis on standardization in the larger environments. But all of them have the same concerns, man. I need to do more with less, and I don't have a whole lot of spare time to learn new stuff.
So what major difference that you observe in small and big business?
Yeah, I think really what I said earlier is probably the biggest difference. In the smaller environments, it seems like they have, I don't know if I would say more time, but they will focus more on sort of, this little segment of the business, and they'll automate the heck out of that and make sure that all their systems are identical. Where with the really bigger environments, their goal is not necessarily to be super, super complex in their automation. It's much more of, I want to make sure that I have, this one Ansible playbook that is going to make sure that all, 10,000 of these routers, for instance, have the same security settings, or, this 20,000 farm servers is going to have all of their software updated or something like that. So I think really the biggest difference is just scale, and how much time folks have to develop the automation solutions on, smaller environments where maybe they can get more detail oriented, as opposed to, I need to do one job across, this 20,000 server environment, and just one task. Does that make sense?
Got it. So today you are a solutions architect. So you
Mhm.
have done a lot of things in technology before to be solutions architect today.
Yes.
So when you're talking with the customer, communicating with the customer, and before that you was into different roles in your life in
Right.
technology, starting in different roles.
Yeah.
So how do you talk to your customer relating your system work that
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
system
I mean,
experience work?
yeah, I started out like many people in information technology. I started out as a system administrator in a really small environment. Like, I think we had 40 computers, so it wasn't like a big enterprise space. And then from there, I moved into larger and larger environments. I spent time at 3M, and I spent time at Bank of America, and so basically, I got more and more and more experience in larger environments, larger enterprise environments. And I think that that's really important, because in those environments, I had to learn not just about the technology that I was dealing with, but also how the technology I was dealing with interfaced with other technologies, how it interfaced with things like, corporate missions. Like, some companies, it's all about, expanding the customer base. In other environments, it's like, it's all about, being as secure as possible, in serving the customers. So learning all of those different sort of intricacies of how I had to interoperate with other teams, based on whatever the stated goals of my department or the company were, um, that led me to understanding better, how technology is used in large scale enterprises. And then, so once I moved out of that sysadmin role and I did some consulting and I worked with, multiple different industries, from transportation to, um, banking to advertising, things like that. I think that by having all of those different types of experience, it made me a really good solution architect, because I could talk across multiple industries and I could discuss different technologies and how those technologies integrate together. And I think that's been what has made me successful as a solution architect.
You have done certification as a
Oh,
solution
gosh.
architect in Red Hat. How was that?
Yes. Yeah. So I have done certifications around, the core operating system. I've done certifications around identity management, performance tuning, high availability clustering, systems management. I mean, like, I've got ridiculous numbers of certifications. And that has been really important, because if you're going to talk to a customer about a technology, I think it's really important that you're able to communicate the best practices for that technology, whether it's security or high availability or whatever. And you need to be able to speak intelligently about things like how, what is the best way to automate tasks? What is the best way to, do updates and upgrades and things like that? If you just sort of, wing it, like, oh, I've done this for a long time and I've kind of figured out how to do something. That's very different from, I've done this for a long time and I understand, what the vendor recommendations are for updates and upgrades and tuning and things like that. So I do think that those certifications are very important.
So transformation from AWS to Red Hat. So how is Red Hat and how it is serving businesses?
Yeah. So, like I said, I worked at Red Hat for about 14 years, and I have always loved what Red Hat stands for, as far as, being good stewards of community, open source software, and then providing support and packaging and documentation and training and things like that. And so when I talk to my customers, obviously, even though I'm very passionate about open source, it's not that I have an expectation that customers should do everything open source all of the time. I understand that there are, different software vendors that perform different tasks. And so my goal is to always, make suggestions about open source solutions, because I have found that the open source community is incredibly responsive, and features come out really quickly, and the net result of that is that we can serve our customers better. But having said that, my goal, number one goal in working with my customers is figuring out what business problems they're trying to solve and helping them to solve those problems. If I can do that using open source software, obviously I will. But, if they're having to interface with, closed source software or proprietary software or something like that, my goal is to make sure that our interfacing with that technology is as seamless as possible. And that's, again, I think that's what makes me successful as a solution architect is I can take that really broad view and understand a bunch of different technologies. And I'm not saying I'm expert on everything because I'm not. There are things that I, am only familiar with, but I am familiar with how we can support the customer in working with that technology and integrating that with what we offer.
Okay, so talking with customers and knowing their requirements and understanding their businesses. So you're doing this as a solutions architect.
Yeah,
So different enterprises belongs to different industries. Do you
yeah,
see difference in working in enterprises which belongs to different industries?
definitely, definitely. Because there are, like I said, if I'm working with a customer who is in, say, financial services, that is going to potentially be very different uh, from, let's say, working with a customer that's in transportation or something like that. So with financial services, obviously one of the biggest things to emphasize is they're looking to grow their customer base. They're looking to do it securely. They're looking to use technologies like intelligence for doing pattern recognition and doing like chat bots and what we call agentic AI. So they have like one set of requirements that is very much around securely growing the business. Where with, let's say transportation or whatever, chip manufacturing or whatever, they may have very different technology needs. They may still be using AI, but maybe they're doing AI around things like generating test cases for software development for simulation of air wings or something crazy like that. So yes, it is definitely different from industry to industry. But the cool thing about that is, even though different industries may have different focuses, they still have common problems, right? They have to be able to develop applications. They have to be able to interface with customers. They have to be able to leverage the data that they have accumulated about the industry and their customers and their processes to try to make what they do more seamless and easier for their customers. So while it's important to understand the differences between industries, it's also really important to see the commonalities so that when you talk to different customers in different industries, you can say, hey, I had a customer who did something similar, even though they were in a different segment, and we were able to help them by doing X, Y, and Z.
So what are those challenges which made you as a solution architect to bring the maximum potential of yours?
So that's a really interesting question because what what I do as a solution architect is obviously right now at Red Hat, I focus mostly on telco. That's the division that I'm in. And so I spend a lot of time with communications and telecommunications, cable operators, even like movie studios and things like that. And so because I'm focusing on those things, as a solution architect, like one of the most important things that I can do is look at trends in whatever the industry is, and right now it's telco. Look at the customers who have been most successful, and assuming that that information is publicly available, saying, hey, this customer did it this way, and here is the cost savings that they recognized. Or maybe like they don't care about cost savings, maybe it's more of, hey, here's the productivity gain that they were able to recognize. And so it's important to be able to look across all of the customer base and then replicate the successes, and then remember, like, oh, for this group it was really important that they were more efficient, but this other group, maybe it was really important that they saved money. And so you have to sort of figure out what's important to your customer, look at the successes that folks have had in the past, and replicate that there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So, what is the difference that you're observing in change of technology
Oh gosh.
comparatively a few
Yeah,
years?
there is one of the things that I've noticed, because I've been doing this for 32 years. And when I first started, you would focus on a technology. Like when I started, it was Novell NetWare. And so I'd learn everything that I could about Novell NetWare. And then maybe peripherally, I would learn about, let's say, Windows, because Windows would log in, Windows workstations would log into Novell NetWare servers. So you focused really deeply on one technology and learned what was necessary peripherally to integrate those together. Fast forward to today, and it is not, it's not your grandfather's IT. Back then you were running a server in an office or in a data center or something like that, and you really just had to focus on that environment. Today, we've got cloud computing, we've got edge networking, we've got wide area networks, we've got internet, we've got all these different technologies, and you can no longer be an expert in one thing. You have to maybe have subject matter expertise in, like for me, my subject matter expertise is in Red Hat Enterprise Linux and the associated technologies. But I also have to understand how to deploy and manage that in AWS, or in a VMware environment on-prem, or in an OpenShift virtualization environment on-prem or across multiple sites. And you have to understand not just Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but how Red Hat Enterprise Linux is going to interface with, again, AWS or Azure, or, a database vendor or whatever. I think the biggest thing that I am noticing today is you have to understand multiple platforms. You have to understand emerging technologies. Like right now, you can't talk to anybody without talking about artificial intelligence. So you have to understand large language models, and you have to understand RAG, and you have to understand how the technology that you are specialized in is going to support those workloads. And so I'm learning more than I ever intended about artificial intelligence, and how to automate the deployment of artificial intelligence, how to use agentic AI or large language models, in an enterprise environment. And so, yeah, I think the biggest thing today is, man, you can't be a specialist in one thing anymore. You have to be a generalist, but then also still maintain your expertise on a couple of deep topics.
So, how IT industry works when it comes to helping non-IT businesses?
Say that again.
How IT industry works uh, by helping other industries?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, again, I think one of the common threads across every industry, whether it's retail or it's financial services or it's transportation or, the federal government or whatever, all of those require information technology, whether it's running servers on premises or running servers in the cloud or running them physical or virtual or edge of network. Like everybody uses IT. And so I think that as an industry, what we're working on as system administrators and DevOps folks and even developers and things like that, I think that right now what the industry is really focusing on is ease of consumption of technology. In other words, we're trying really hard to lower the barrier of entry to whether it's cloud computing or virtualization or AI or application platforms or whatever. And even though there are competing vendors, whether it's cloud vendors or virtualization vendors or database vendors or application platform vendors, one of the things that we are working on as an industry is interoperability and integration, so that if I am a company that's, let's say, a manufacturing company, I need to be able to have a similar experience, whether it is running a workload on premises or running a workload in Azure or running a workload in, Google or AWS. And so one of the things that I think we as an industry really need to focus on is making sure that that user experience is at least similar enough that you don't get locked in to one cloud vendor or one virtualization vendor or something like that, so that even though maybe this is a new vendor, like I understand the basic concepts, storage and networking and operating system virtualization or containerization or whatever. So I think that is the biggest thing that we're doing as an industry, and I think that is the thing that we need to continue to focus on is democratization of technology and democratization of content.
So, what's your approach when you are having conversation with the customers?
Yeah, sure. It's almost always the same. It is, tell me what your mission is. What is your company or your department or division's mission? Because that's the most important thing, right? Like if I'm again, if I'm talking to a manufacturing company, well, we want to be able to make the best of whatever it is that we're manufacturing, and it needs to be the best. The quality needs to be good. The costs need to be low. We want to spend, and it's really weird as an IT guy, but customers are like, I want to spend the least amount of money on IT as possible, and I don't want IT to be my job. I want making whatever it is that I manufacture, right? So, what is your mission? What are the barriers to that mission? And I don't just mean what are the technological barriers. I mean, tell me about your market. Tell me about who your competitors are and what they're doing. Tell me about, what macro factors like the economy or international trade or whatever, like tell me about the things that are getting in your way of being successful. Then tell me what technology you're using now and is it effective, and tell me about what you want to use technologically in the future and how you think that's going to make your business more successful. And if I can gather that information, if I can get sort of a big view of what my customer is trying to accomplish, and I have technical solutions that can help them get to that desired future state, then, again, I'm going to be successful. The customer's going to be successful. My employer is going to be successful. And so, but the biggest thing is listen. You have to listen. You have to ask smart questions. And you can't just, especially as a solution architect, you can't just say, oh, you need to run applications. So here's my application platform. You should use my application platform, because you need to understand what it is those applications are doing, where they're going to run. Are they going to be cloud-based or on premises? Like, there are all kinds of things that you need to really understand from your customer before you can propose a solution. So you got to listen. You got to ask smart questions. You got to understand what the customer is actually trying to accomplish, and then you can propose solutions.
So, as a solutions architect, understanding the architecture of their business and designing the business according to the future needs
Mm-hmm.
and client requirements, and every enterprise expert, I mean every enterprise founder or CEO intention is to run in the market for a long time.
Yep.
So when they approach you and ask for the solutions for their architecture, which will help them in scaling in future. So how your ideas are, like how you think after 20 years or after 30 years, if my business, if there will be a lot of changes. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
what is happening in my enterprise after 20 years, it will be completely different. So how you
Yes.
design the architecture, uh,
Yep.
putting the future needs, or
Right.
do you vision something before, or do you imagine something before, or like do you think in the way that company CEO is thinking, or may not think, or you want to give advice that may be helpful for them in future and will be thankful for you when that day comes.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is actually really important, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Architect, or as a technical person, to look at what's available today and say, "Ooh, here's a piece. I can give you that piece, and I'll make you successful." And I mean, obviously, that is important, but what you're talking about is more of sort of technological vision. So if I'm talking to a customer and that customer is saying, it depends. Like, let's say I've got a customer that's been in business for a very long time. Um, that conversation is going to be very different because they have a lot of technical debt. In other words, there are technologies that they have invested in, and they've been successful with that technology, but maybe that technology doesn't scale, or maybe it's not well suited for cloud computing, where you have sort of decomposed applications, or whatever. So the conversation that I would have with those customers is, I'm going to recommend that you look at what has been successful, and you look at how that success can migrate into cloud scale applications, or application or containerized services, or whatever, because that does seem to be the future of application services. Is, instead of making one big monolithic application that runs on big machine, or maybe even a big virtual machine, look at how those services operate. If it makes sense, um, containerize that, and then make it available to be able to be run on-prem with you know containers, or in the cloud with containers. Um, so that is a mindset that technologists in enterprises need to adopt. And there are times when I talk to technologists and they're like, nope, I like the way things are running right now. It's run this way for 10 years. I'm perfectly happy with it. And there are times where, you have to be very sensitive to where they're coming from and, understand that there is going to be resistance to moving to newer technology stacks. And so you have to be sensitive, you have to be sort of gentle, and say, hey, I get that what you're doing has been successful, but what happens in the future when that technology is not available anymore? Maybe there's not no upgrades for it or something like that because the vendor has moved to a new model, a new paradigm, like containerized applications or something like that. So you have to be sensitive. And then the other side of the spectrum is, you need to help the customer, and you need to let them or make them understand that, hey, I'm not coming in here and saying, oh, you should buy this whole new software stack because I make money off of it. It's much more, hey, you need to future proof your business because technology is constantly evolving. There are new ways of doing things like application services or containerization or cloud scale applications. So you need to help them understand this is not me just coming in and saying, hey, I want to make money off of you. This is me advising you on how your business is going to have to evolve. And you can do it in small steps, which is not as painful. Or you can fall into the trap of saying, oh, it's worked this way for 10 years. And all of a sudden you've got a ton of technical debt and you're having to refactor an entire line of business applications. And that's painful and that's expensive. So it's an education thing. And then the flip side of that is, let's say it's a new business. Then I'm talking to that business and I'm like, start out at web scale. Start out with containerization because I think it's safe to say that containerization is going to be around for a long time. Not necessarily that one specific type of containerization is going to be around. Like if you look at the history of, Docker started or I don't know if I would say started, but was one of the most successful containerization companies. But then Podman became really popular for containerization. So the role of the solution architect is to say, pay attention to what's coming, dip your toe in the pool. I'm not saying you have to adopt every new thing that comes because there's no way you can do that, but get to know what's coming down the pipe, and be at least familiar enough with it that if it looks like, yes, that is really the way that technology is going, that you're not caught flat-footed and you have people who have experimented with it so you can adopt that technology quickly so you don't rack up all that technical debt to the point where it becomes catastrophically difficult and expensive to migrate.
Does AI affected your role?
Yeah, absolutely. There are tools around artificial intelligence that we are actually baking into every one of our products. At Red Hat, obviously, kind of our three primary businesses are Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Ansible Automation, and OpenShift, which is a distribution of Kubernetes. And we are baking in technology to run on the console for each of these systems. There's the command line assistant for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, where you can literally run AI queries from the command line and say, hey, how do I configure this service, for instance? And it'll give you answers. on Ansible, on the console, there's the intelligent assistant where you can say, hey, I need to perform these automation tasks, and it'll actually give you links to the documentation, and it'll give you advice. It'll be prescriptive. And the same is true on OpenShift. There is a console plugin, basically, that you can ask, hey, how do I perform these tasks? But we are also on OpenShift and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we're also optimizing those products to run, excuse me, AI workloads. So literally every customer that I talk to is asking about enabling AI. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to stay somewhat agnostic. And by that I mean, like, we have our own AI, obviously, but we want to help customers be able to consume AI, whether it's ours or someone else, and we want to make sure that we're making that as seamless and easily integrated as possible. You cannot have a conversation with any IT decision maker right now without discussing what they're doing with AI and how you can enable them.
So, what do you say to the enterprises and the leaders of those enterprises who are listening to this about Red Hat?
Oh, okay. I mean, the big thing that I think the overarching sort of message that I deliver is what we try to do at Red Hat is we do try to make your user experience the same, whether it is installing our operating system on a physical server in your environment or installing it as a VM out in the cloud. Containerization is the same on-prem versus the cloud. Automation is the same on-prem versus the cloud. And so I think that one of my most important, or one of the messages that I think is most important to deliver is we try to abstract what the underlying technology is from your day-to-day operations. So you're going to have the same experience on AWS or Azure or Google Cloud or IBM Cloud or a local data center on bare metal, a local data center on virtual machines, and so using open source technologies like Red Hat delivers is going to make your day-to-day operations abstracted from and independent of whatever the underlying infrastructure is. And so there are significant cost savings, training savings, things like that by having a consistent experience across all of those platforms. How you automate it, how you run applications, how you run, operating systems, all those things. If you unify that across all of your platforms, it's going to make your staff more effective. It's going to minimize cost for doing things like training, and it's going to maximize your productivity in those application environments or whatever, no matter where you're running them.
So, at last, uh, you have said about my work in the previous conversation. And what is your observation about my work being a Red Hat solutions architect?
Um, are you talking about like doing this podcast kind of thing?
Yeah, the podcast
Yeah.
that I'm doing.
No, I have been very impressed and really enjoyed watching all the different guests that you have on. It's been really fascinating to me because you expose sort of perspectives from different industries and different levels. Like, you've had everything on from someone like me who's just an individual contributor all the way up to people who are making decisions across their environment. And so I have found that to be very interesting and very educational. So I love what you're doing. I think it's fantastic, and I love checking in every once in a while to see who's he had on and what have they talked about. So I like it.
So, how this is going to helpful for me in future?
Oh, I think, one of the things that has made me successful in my career is that I've been exposed to a bunch of different industries and perspectives and things like that, different technologies and stuff like that. And I think you're doing the same thing. I think that you're doing it by interviewing different people from different industries, using different technology stacks, coming from different experiences. And so I think that that's going to be a huge benefit for you, because you're going to be able to speak intelligently about all sorts of different industries and technologies and perspectives, and so I think it's fantastic. I think it's a great idea.
So where people can learn from you?
So I have a whole bunch of videos on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and you just search for my name, Thomas Cameron, and Red Hat, two words, or Thomas Cameron and Linux, there are a bunch of videos that Red Hat has published that I'm being videoed. If you go to my page on people.redhat.com/tcameron, I've got presentations there. And I do a lot of presentations. Like this last weekend, I did a presentation on Ansible automation at Texas Linux Fest. So if you, again, if you go to the Texas Linux Fest website, you'll see my presentation and a link to the video. So, and as always, I'm easy to find. I'm on IRC on Libera. Or Libra chat, I should say. So my nick is Choir Boy there, and you can see me. You can find me on LinkedIn, and if anybody wants to connect there, I'm more than happy to connect. And I have established a bunch of mentorships, or menteeships, I guess, where I'm mentoring folks that I've met on LinkedIn and things like that. So I'm available, man. Reach out. I'm real easy to reach. I'm Thomas@redhat.com. So if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to ping me.
I'll put your web links in my website along
Okay.
with this podcast interview links. People who finds our interview on the internet can able to see and learn from the work that you have done and the information that you have shared through different sources. I believe
Cool.
that will be helpful.
Excellent. I'm glad.
Can I put this clip on my podcast with your permission?
Of course. Of course.
Thanks, Cameron, again for giving me opportunity.
My pleasure. It's good to chat with you. It's been a while.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much again. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.